We are now recording.
Welcome back to Off the Clock, episode 3, where today we're going to finish up some of our... No, we're not finishing up anything. Welcome to Off the Clock, episode 3, where today we're going to talk about interviewing. So, Donald, when we're talking about the non-technical portion of an interview, what are some do's and don'ts that are on top of your list here?
Let's see. Well, we'll start with don'ts because I think some of the don'ts are probably more important than the do's.
I
The
agree.
the don'ts would be, yeah, even if you maybe have a perfectly valid reason for doing so, generally, well, not generally, you just don't talk shit about your current or old employer
Or boss,
or
or
boss.
manager,
Yeah,
or anybody, anything negative. If you have something negative to say, just don't fucking say it. We don't care. We don't want to hear. We hear that, and we're going to think, okay, this individual is a possible HR liability.
yeah. Or you're just bringing some kind of baggage that we don't really want to deal with.
Yeah, no,
Now, if you get hired, by all means, tell us your shit stories.
right. Yes, exactly.
If the, so here's this is kind of like a question specific answer would be if they ask you, and generally this does happen if you especially if you still work somewhere, generally they're going to ask you, well, why are you leaving your current employer, or why did you leave your last employer? Even like generally you want to try to give them an answer that's growth oriented, right? You want to say like, oh, I'm grateful for the time I spent there and the opportunities, but I'm looking to take on some new responsibilities or tackle some new challenges that wasn't available for me to tackle at my last or current position, something like that.
And this is borderline a negative statement. It's borderline, but saying that I want to grow professionally and I'm not getting any of that where I'm at now is I think that is a very, very viable answer.
Yeah.
I think it's an honest and true answer. You don't need to dive in about why you're not getting that or anything negative, but saying that I think is an okay statement.
Yeah, I mean, and if the person you're talking to, or not even the person, just whoever the team or the company involved with making a decision would be, if they hear you say that and for some reason that they don't like that, I don't think I want to work for you anyway.
No, I'm 100%. 100% there. Yep. Because we all have to look out for what's best for our own interest at times.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And that's something, if that's something that's important to you, get it out on the table because it tells us as the people who are interviewing that yes, this person wants to learn.
Hmm.
And once they learn this, they're probably going to want to learn something after that.
This next point, we sort of touched about this in, I believe it was the resume building one. Or no, it was a job searching episode. It was before you do the interview, do like a little research about the company, right? You don't have to like go in depth about like what they do and who they are and all this other stuff. Just show them that because they showed interest in you, you reciprocated the motion. You went, okay, let me see who you are. Let me get a general idea of who you are culturally and what you do.
Right.
Because they probably will ask about it. And if it seems like you don't know anything about them, they're gonna be like, well, why do you want to work here? Like, why are you here?
Right. No, I agree. Knowing something, even if it's little enough that can spark questions about, well, I saw on the website you do this. How do you guys approach that?
Yeah.
Like right there. You ask something like that and you're going to get some really good answers. And the folks who are in the room interviewing you know that you're vested in the conversation and that you have already done some research and you're trying to learn more about what the job actually entails.
Mm-hmm. This next one, I wasn't super sure how to word it, and might be hard to press to find examples, but hopefully I can kind of demonstrate this next point, which is when there's all kinds of probably very stereotypical questions you get asked in non-technical interviews, right? Um, in general, if you can't really think of like a good answer, you should always at least try to word the answer in a way that demonstrates either some kind of self growth or that demonstrates in some way you will provide value to that company. So an example of this would be a very common question that you get asked is like, "Oh, what is your weakest skill or something?" So you want to try to answer that in a way that for first off, don't say you don't have one because you're full of shit. Everybody's bad at something. Yeah. Second, but after that, it would be just be honest, admit to something that maybe you ain't the best at, but also don't just say, "Well, I'm bad at this." Then that's it, because that looks bad. Because it's like, okay, you're bad at something, but you're not trying to do anything to improve it. Try to you follow it up with, but in order to get better at that, I am doing this, right? So like, let's say one of your examples is you say, well, maybe I'm not the best at time management, but in order to be better at time management, I've been doing this, and I have gotten better at it as a result.
Right.
Yeah.
Like one of the forever, it has plagued me forever, is documentation, writing. I'm dyslexic. I didn't do that well in school when it came to English and stuff. So coming into this position, even, documentation was one of my weakest points. But I found myself in a situation after being at this position for 2 months where I had to send out a technical email every Friday talking about the work that the team did. And I would start that on Tuesday, and I would write a draft, and I would work so hard at it that no one ever knew that I had problems writing and producing good documentation. And so all of a sudden, this thing that I was scared of and had to do on a weekly basis, and it would take me 4 days to get it done, turned into 3, turned into 2. Now I can do one of those emails like the back of my hand. And talking about things like that and how you've improved yourself are also very, very strong tools.
Yeah, if like just going off what Brunleyy just said, like if like let's say this was an actual interview and I just asked him that question, provide like something like red flaggy hadn't been said by him. If he had just said that, like, nah, this interview's done. He's going to the next step. Like that he'd been going the next step after that.
And those are the things that we as interviews, we have those instances where we have Slack going. We're talking the entire time behind the scenes about the person we're talking to, coordinating on questions or directing where someone should ask questions next, things like that. And Donald is exactly right. If someone answered a question like this, we'd be like, I think they'd be a great fit. Mm-hmm. Especially if this was the non-technical portion of the interview process, would be like, let's get them out an assessment. Yeah. We're done with this interview. Ask them if they got any questions, get everyone out of the room.
Yep. Let's see. I don't think I had. Well, here's another point, which is take a hell word this. I think you actually already touched on this a little bit too, which is when you're going to that interview, come ready with your own questions. Because here's something I think a lot of people forget when they're going into any job interview is what you should be doing is you should be interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. Because it's like, of course they want to find out whether you're a good fit, but you also want to find out whether you want to fucking work there or not.
Right. Yeah. Right. And there are a couple really important questions too that you can ask as the person, as the candidate, especially in the technical world. What kind of technologies you guys use? You guys do this, like, okay, so we're a payment processor. That's what our company does. And so asking questions about how we actually handle payment processing or things like that, or how we handle these services. How do we deploy? How often do we deploy? things like that, day-to-day business, that tells us that you're interested. But those are also things that you want to know. If you're working in a shop where you're deploying every 6 months, we deploy at least once a week. Like that's a huge fucking difference. We could be deploying 30 times a fucking day, and you're only deploying once every, twice a year. That's a huge difference. Are you going to be able to keep up with that kind of environment? Is that kind of environment, that fast-paced environment, something you're looking for? You'll be able to figure that out.
And the other thing, that the real reason you want to do this, and it just sort of relates back to what we were talking about with the job searching episode, which is basically verifying that whatever their job listing was actually matches up with what like they say they want you to do or what they even do. Because I've had multiple times where their job, their job listing said that they do A, B, and C, and they use X, Y, and Z. And then I'll go in and go, I see you all use this. Well, actually, wait, no. Like, no, we don't use that. We use this. I'm like, okay. Well, why was it on the job listing?
And I think another super powerful question that you can ask as a candidate is, what are the expectations for me coming in? In the first 3 months, what is going to be expected of me? And that will let you know, if they can talk about an onboarding process. Do they have onboarding materials? Do they have a vetted process? If none of that's in place, you have an opportunity ahead of you. That's something that you can come in and say, okay, well, I will onboard and I will document this onboarding process. And now all of a sudden you've added value. And it's okay to say that in the interview. Like, oh, we don't really have an onboarding process. Well, I can help with that. I don't mind creating that documentation while I'm onboarding, so that way the next person who comes on after me has a little bit easier of a job. So I think that's an important question. It's very telling of the company that you're applying for.
So if you don't have a hiring process, don't hide that. Just say like, hey, this is new, or we ain't quite figured it out yet. There'll probably be bumps. Actually, when I first came on to the place that me and Brunleyy work at, they didn't really have onboarding for me because my position was brand new. So I kind of had to what's that term? I had to kind of trailblaze that that onboarding.
That is so crazy how we ended up on the same team and stuff, man. It really is. But that's different. So that is a different episode. But it just goes to show you, Donald and I come from we're both tech. We're both in the tech industry, but we come from different backgrounds, and the way that we were able to come together and, talk about things outside of work, in our one-on-one, this is how we were like, dude, we should do a fucking podcast. So, I think that's important information, and maybe we can do like an About Us episode at some point, and kind of we can go into our backgrounds and whatnot. But I think those are all great points for the non-technical portion of the interview. But what happens when you get that call back, when you get that second call that says, hey, you're going to be talking to 2, 3, maybe even 4 technical folks in the same room who are going to be grilling you about, the things on your resume, the things that you said you've done. How do you start preparing for that, Donald?
Well, let's see. So in a large part, it depends on if there was a step before that, such as an assessment.
Right.
If there was an assessment, I definitely come ready to talk about why I made the decisions that I made in creating that the solution for that assessment. Another thing, and this is probably very important above all else, especially in this particular field, is if you don't know something, just say you don't know it. Don't sit there and try to bullshit an answer. Because 1, they'll pick up on that you're bullshitting, and 2, your inability to admit you don't know something gives a flag that you may not grow as much as they want you to grow.
Right. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that we talked about that in a previous episode. I think that we talked about it on our first episode. But yes, you need to be able to come prepared to talk about the things that you said you've done. And we know within the first, couple words of your answer, whether, you can speak educatedly on the subject, or if you're just kind of winging it, trying to make it up instead of saying you don't know. We can pick up on that instantly, instantly, and so could anyone else who's asking the technical question.
Yeah, because like to reference the first episode again, I don't put anything on my resume that I don't feel confident about being able to hold a technical conversation about. So even if I haven't done something like kind of like official or in production with a tool, um, if you, I'm going to be able to at least have a functioning level of knowledge, so that if I jumped into the position, I'd be able to pick it up quickly. And two, if they talked about it, I wouldn't fail just like obvious questions. Like, I guess an example would be, let's take React for example. React is a front end framework. If you say you know React, and I go, okay, I bring you an interview, and I go, okay, you say you know how to use React, okay? What's the difference between a stateful and a non-stateful component? And you can't answer that, you're full of shit. You don't know anything about React. Or if I ask you something like, oh, why when you're creating a new React component, why would you choose to make it a class versus a function? And you can't answer that, yeah, you're full of shit. You don't know anything.
Right. A good one too, especially in our field, in the QA field, in automation world, is when people say Selenium, and you ask them how they use Selenium. Well, we use it to automate web applications, or whatever. Okay, well, do you use it inside of a framework? What's your framework? We use Selenium. All right. Well, what language do you use to feed into Selenium? We use Selenium. It's like, okay, if you can't actually talk about Selenium, I keep coming back to it because it's just a phrase in our industry, then don't fucking put it on your resume. Don't do it. Just don't do it. You can say, as part of your objective would be to, I would like to find a place in a company where I could start, and use my skill set, but learn to grow into a position where I would be using tools like Selenium on a more regular basis.
Yeah. Let's see. What else would I do to prepare for a technical interview? So I'm probably a little weird in the sense that I don't prep for interviews. I've always been kind of weird in the fact that the more I prep for something, the probably more likely I'll screw up. I tend to flow better off the top of my head rather than trying to like reference shit that I like read up on or like wrote down or something. Because I think maybe this is probably something I picked up from school. It's not necessarily a good thing. Is I'll try way too hard to adhere to it rather than just reacting to just having the conversation. At the end of the day, an interview is just conversation. And if you're trying to be, I guess, too overly prepared about it, you may come off as too like stiff and like awkward.
Right. And unfortunately, I'm the same way. So I can't really provide any insight to, what it looks like to actually prepare for an interview. But I mean, company research, research about the company that you're talking about. We've talked about that briefly in episodes 1, 2, and now 3. Be prepared to talk about the things that are on your resume. As long as you can talk about, the industry, the stuff that you put on your resume, and if there was an assessment of any sorts, come to the table with talking about how you would improve it, why you made certain decisions, because you're going to get asked. I would say that those are the 3 biggest points that I would try to prep on.
Yeah. And I guess something I'll kind of hang on to, because some places sort of have their technical interview have an assessment in it. That's not uncommon, especially in like the FANG companies. Like the technical interview like is the assessment sort of technically. A lot of those bigger companies, like what their hiring process is and like what they do in those interviews is pretty publicly known. So if I don't know, that you're going to go to a Google interview, it's pretty much standardly known that if you're going into a technical interview at Google, they're going to basically give you kind of like a code kata to do. And you have to sit there and do it and talk them through. Be aware of what you're walking into if you can. Otherwise, I just sort of default to everything else I already mentioned above.
Right. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay to ask.
Yeah.
It's okay to ask the recruiter, hey, I got this second interview. What should I be prepared to talk about? Am I going to have to do anything? Am I going to have to do a demo? Am I going to have to go through my solution
Yeah.
and talk through it line by line? That's an okay question to have.
Mhm.
It really is. So,
I,
Donald, here's something that's not on our list, and it's something that I'm not sure that I can talk really accurately about it. But what do you do if you're one of those people who interviewing is tough for, and you walk into a panel of three people that are asking you questions? What do you do about that? I don't know, because I love to talk, and I can talk to just about anybody.
mm.
So that's not really something that I ever face. I have kind of faced it, but what do you think that you do to get yourself through that situation?
I think it sort of just comes back to what I said before about at the end of the day, maybe minus if there is like a like actual assessment going on there. An interview is just a conversation. If you're walking into this with just the mindset of, okay, I'm gonna have a conversation about, maybe some kind of tech or some kind of project that I submitted with people who have knowledge in the same domain space I have, I think it's far less intimidating that way. Because if you walk into it like I'm about to fucking take a test or some shit, then most people have test anxiety and don't do well with that.
Right.
Because and if you know there's a an assessment coming up, I think people tend to stress out because again they're afraid of admitting that they don't know something. But like, if you just admit when you don't know something, like that's fine. People will mark that off all the time, or saying that like, oh, if I don't know this, I'm screwed. Like, no, 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 no. You every single position like this, don't matter what you knew coming into it, you're gonna have to learn stuff. There ain't shit. There's shit you ain't gonna know. So I want to see you tell me I don't know this, because it tells me, okay, they're not afraid to admit they don't know something. Okay, so let's talk through it to see if we can come to the answer.
Right. So you don't know how that works.
Yeah.
What would you do to get yourself into a spot where you were able to have an educated conversation and start learning about this would be my follow-up question, right?
Yeah.
I don't know this. Okay, how would you go about learning it and putting it to practice?
Mhm. Um.
You see, Donald, here I'm thinking that we might have room for another episode, because we're talking about how to folks to prepare for an interview.
Mhm.
I think that we can do a spin-off episode and talk about the people who are doing the interviews and how we approach those, because I
Oh,
think
true.
I think that's one thing that our team does really well is recruit. We have very, very low attrition. We promote from within. We have a process that we follow every time. I think that talking about some of that stuff in a future episode, maybe even episode 4, would be a great idea.
Okay, I do. Yeah, I agree.
Good. All right, so back to technical interviews.
So since I mentioned that sometimes assessments are in the interviews, I will briefly touch on the different types of assessments you have, as some of these have a special place in hell for me. So more commonly, unfortunately, the type of assessment you're going to be given is whether it's like you're gonna get sent to some place like I can't remember the other place now. It's one of those places where you're basically given like a bunch of like arbitrary like programming problems to solve, right? Like uh generate whatever it's called, like the checksum for credit cards, whatever that fucking problem's called. Stuff like that. These really the only way to really prepare for them is to like go read like books about like algorithms and stuff, because a lot of those are pretty like dependent upon knowing algorithms of some kind or another. But again, if you don't know what the algorithm is, just say you don't know what it is. There are really bad ways of that companies do these assessments sometimes, where For one thing, I hate when they give these assessments and the person who's giving you the assessment isn't one of the engineers. Because you literally have no one to ask the question to. And I think I've even seen instances where like they literally won't let you look up anything about it, and I'm like, this what is this supposed to show? I don't understand. Yeah.
They record your browser sessions, right? Yeah, I've seen that as well. Take home challenge, or it was like, hey, you know what? We're while this is open, we're tracking every key that you press.
Yeah, and I'm like, you're not allowed to look up on another tab. What do you mean? Literally every single fucking software engineer Google shit literally every day. What are you talking about?
Hey, that's how you find your solutions.
Yeah,
right. Googling your peers. I mean, come on.
I mean, in fact, I need to write like a blog post about this. I am of the strong opinion that one of the things that should be looked for if you're doing like a live, like giving somebody a live assessment, is how proficiently, if they don't know something, can they look it up, figure out what it is, and actually apply the solution? Because then you go, okay, because this is what they're going to be doing most of the time anyway. You don't know shit off the top of your head. You're going to have to look it up. So if I can see how quickly you can take this new information and apply it, that's a pretty big indicator of how well you're going to do or not.
I agree. No, I agree. Yeah, I think that I think that as a whole, the industry does not. They frown upon not knowing something, when not knowing something is your greatest asset.
Yeah,
because that gives you an opportunity to level yourself up and learn.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question for you. I don't know if you've even been in this position or not. Have you been in a position where somebody's giving you a technical assessment to do that is so stupid and unrelated to what they're at, like what you're trying to apply for, that you literally just walk out of the interview?
Never left an interview. No. I have gotten coding challenges, automation. I'm automation engineer. Is how I got started with most of this stuff. And there were some that were like, okay, you know what, I'm not doing this. You know, some of those were like, hey, we want you. We're using Java. You need to do this in Java. I'm not using Java. Sorry, I'm not doing it again, right? But I've never like walked out of an interview. I have removed myself from some of the interview processes because I didn't like things that were said on the or the first interview or whatever, you know. But I've never walked out of one. How about you? Have you ever like been like, dude, I'm not finishing this interview?
I've had people give me technical assessments, both live and just like, you know, said, hey, go follow this link and do this, and we'll look at the result. And the test was the most stupid, unrelated thing. So like, here's an example. Was so this was a position for a company that used, I think it was Go, and it was Go and something else. I think it was some other language. But the test assessment that I was given was in like C or C++ or something. And I'm like, what the fuck? What does this have to do with what you all do? And it wasn't even just like, what does this code do? I look, it wasn't like human code. It was like this horribly abstract garbage that if I saw this in your code base, I'd want to punch myself in the face. And I'm like, people don't write code like this. And I've seen that before. And when I see it, I go, okay, listen, I'm not taking this. This is such a fucking waste of time.
Hey, okay. Yeah, I've never done that in an interview. But I've never been in a position where I had to do something really, really technical in an interview, like a coding challenge or you know, talking people through a solution, like a whiteboard solution. I've never really had to do that. So
fair enough.
Best to ask about that one.
Yeah. So the other kind of assessment, and this is what we actually do, is like a little take-home project. I think these are far more effective, but I think we have a good middle ground with this. Is it needs to be something that's, you know, relevant enough to what your team's actually looking for, but the person can demonstrate that they can work in y'all's tool chain, y'all's ecosystem. But don't really like take-home assessments that literally take like hours to do. In fact, there's been I think like twice where I've been asked to do a take home assessment, and I look over this and I'm like, this is really going to take like a weekend. Are you going to pay me for this? No, well, fuck you. I'm not doing it then.
Yeah. I get that, and I think that has definitely happened to us. Like, hey, we sent someone the coding challenge, and they're just like, dude, I'm not fucking I'm just gonna make this thing work. That's all I'm gonna do.
Right.
So yeah, I get that. And I have turned down coding challenges too that were like, no, I'm not fucking doing this. Like, this is a waste of my time. But yeah, I think that we do a pretty good job of what we do, keeping them simple. But I still think that if you're going to do the coding challenge or the assessment, if you decide that it's something you want to move forward with it, give it your fucking all. You know, turn in something that you're proud of. Would be my biggest piece of advice, I think.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you. There's like so I have a rule for these types of assessments if I'm giving one of them, which is I have a hard cutoff for what I'm going to do. Now I forget who says it. There's like a mantra for iterating on software projects. I forget what the order it is, but it's like make it work, make it concise, make it readable. There's basically steps for iterating on code and software. Obviously, the first thing I'm going to do is just get the shit to work.
Right.
Now, if it seems like this is taking too much time to do the other steps, here's what I do, and I've seen 0 people do this. And if they did this, I'd be far more receptive to when you get kind of like spaghetti code solutions. Is I actually write out, okay, here's why I did this stuff. Here's why it's in this state. Here, if I were to continue working on this, here are what the next iterations would look like. And here are the decisions I would make, because it shows that, okay, you got something working. That's the most important step, is the shit actually works. And the second thing is you're already thinking into the future about how do you make this better? How do you make this so that it's easier to maintain for when someone else takes over the project? If it's something that has like an efficiency constraint to it, that you've thought about how to optimize it to run faster. Like if somebody showed me that and their solution wasn't great, I would push them forward, because I'm like, well, they already thought about the other stuff. They just need more time to do it.
I agree. If you take a shortcut, let's get it documented as to why you took it and what you're going to do to resolve it. Right. Yeah. You know, that's just as important as doing the work.
Yeah.
If you turn in a solution and you think that it's your best work and you're not willing to take any constructive feedback, then, you know,
no.
Even do the assessment, just move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll give an example of one that I did like this to sort of demonstrate. There was one time I applied for a position where the assessment was to provide to them a front end and a back end. The back end was meant to be just an API with one endpoint that returned some kind of data. Didn't matter what kind of data it was, just return data. And then the front end just had to basically be something that would present that information. The position that I was applying for was a senior level position. But I knew the solution I was going to return to them with the time constraint that I gave myself was not going to look like a senior solution. But every decision, again, that I made in terms of I wrote the backend in Go, I used this framework, and I even specifically said, I use this framework because you all use Node.js and it looks a lot like Express.js, so I thought it would be easier for y'all to follow. Why I structured the way I did. Here's the front end, it's React. I haven't worked with React a lot, so here's in its current state. Here's how it could be refactored to use like more commonly efficient patterns for arranging it. Like what was it called? There was like there's like a pattern in React called the presentation and controller pattern, where you have like a separation of the logic about retrieving the data for the component, and then the part that actually displays the information on the DOM. Just stuff like that. And like they looked it over. We had a conversation about all this. They really liked the fact that, I was already thinking about, okay, it worked, and here's how I would probably change it. Obviously, they didn't go forward because they probably had somebody who, turned in better code. But whatever. I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to spend a weekend working on y'all's damn homework, bro.
Right. Yeah. No. And I think that's a valid point. That's a valid point. And I think that we would look at that as a positive, right? As long as this wasn't a total hack together solution, right?
Yeah.
Right. All right. Anything else to cover for technical interviews?
No, I think I've already talked about the different kinds of interviews, and verbally expressed my dismay for a lot of the coding exercises. So yeah, I think I've done covered all my bases.
Right on. The only thing I want to just reiterate is, like Donald said earlier, you're interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you.
Yes.
So come to these conversations ready to talk about solutions, ready to ask questions, and ready to learn, more about the company and the people that are interviewing you, because it is a two-way street. So that wraps up episode 3. We will be back soon with episode 4, where we're going to talk about the inverse of the interviewing process and what you can do to build a high performance team with low attrition.